go. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Anna DeMeo from the Faculty of Sustainable Design Engineering, who led the student delegation to the Faroes. The students are going to give us a presentation, approximately 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for questions. And please take it away, Anna and Team Faroes.
Great, thank you, and thanks everyone for being here. So, the Hydrogen Learning Network is made up of a number of northern countries, including Canada, and they had some funding from NORA, and they wanted to do a significant project, or a significant event that highlighted education and outreach. So UPEI, being a member of this organization, pitched this idea of doing a real-world project-based program, much like the project-based work we do here at UPEI. And hence the, let me do this, the International Community Energy Challenge was born. So this past June, we took 25 students from universities across 5 different countries to engage in 5 different projects with real-world clients, and those clients range from businesses to communities. So I'm going to let these students here explain to you the projects and their experiences. But first, I just wanted to lay the foundation a bit in developing this program. It was really founded on 2 key principles when we were developing the program. The first is that of interdisciplinary. So the work, the students, the projects, all needs to be interdisciplinary. So as we tackle issues of climate and energy in the world today, we really can't silo that into individual disciplines. We have to take a multifaceted approach to tackle these issues. Business, science, engineering, education, policy, communications, art, government. And so we interviewed, I think almost 30 applicants across all the disciplines at UPEI, and our 4 other sister, or partner, I shouldn't say sister, our 4 other partner universities did the same. And we brought together 25 students across a number of different disciplines. And we made sure that the projects were interdisciplinary in their very nature, which you'll hear about tonight. The other key component is that of community. This is really near and dear to me. In the past decade, I've worked extensively in community energy, especially on islands. And it's really important as you go into a community that you understand place, and you understand people, you understand their history and their culture, and you just don't come in and try to impose a solution or ideas without understanding that. So a significant portion of this program was immersing the students into the culture, learning the history, interviewing and speaking with and developing relationships with the locals, and that was a really key component. So with that setting the stage for all of you, I'm going to have each of these students are going to come up and share a portion of their experience over the somewhere between 10 and 12 days. Sometimes it felt like it was a day, and sometimes it felt like it was a month. But I think it was about 10 to 12. Yeah. And I believe I'm introducing Jordan first. Come on up, Jordan.
Maybe we should all be introduced and all gather around, kind of thing? What do you guys think?
Why don't you introduce yourself as you come up and what you're doing?
Well, I guess I'm Jordan. Could be that today. I'm the one on the far right, clearly. I'm in engineering as well. These are the rest, but we'll get everyone introduced as we come up. So as Anna mentioned, we're going to just talk about our experiences in the International Community Energy Challenge in the Faroe Islands, a little bit about their history, some island insights we gain, knowing people or place, a bit of their nature, and then we're going to go into the design challenges we were brought into, just a bit of a cursory glance at them. So you already know where the Faroe Islands are. This is going to do a nice little animation. All the way over here. But we already know that. So a little bit of background. Of course, the Faroe Islands have amongst the highest yearly CO2 emissions per capita at 12.5 tons. But beyond that, they have the second highest oil barrels consumed per capita. And that speaks to their reliance on ocean travel, etc. They're also committed to 100% green energy on land, that is their electricity supply, by the year 2030. So with those goals in mind and the goals of NORA and promoting hydrogen as a fuel source, we were all brought together in order to further pursue them. So the Faroese culture is heavily influenced by their isolation and reliance on nature, which means that within their context, they're very interested in living sustainably and living for the world, respecting nature, etc. So our design challenge, sponsored by the Hydrogen Learning Network, was a timely opportunity for all of us to get together, as well as industry on the Faroe speaking with power companies, etc., in order to explore some unique and complementary ways to integrate hydrogen into their energy source. Benefits of hydrogen are it can be generated from renewable sources and then burned cleanly, safely produced, stored, and transported. And then decarbonized sectors that need the energy to be dispatchable and as well as mobile. So Anna mentioned the 5 participants from these 5 universities: Heriot-Watt University in the Orkney Islands in Scotland, the University of Bergen in Norway, the Faroe Islands University, as well as the Icelandic University, and ourselves, the University of Prince Edward Island. And I'm sure you all know where these countries are, but they're quite spread out. And the Faroe Islands represents kind of a middle meeting point there for all the students. A little bit more about the Faroese history. We mentioned that there were people there before. They were Irish monks, in fact, that settled in the 6th century. The Faroese name comes from the Old Norse, the Vikings that arrived in the 9th century. And then they established the oldest parliament in the world, in fact, in the current capital city, or just outside the current capital city of Tórshavn. And these Vikings brought with them Norwegian ancestry as well as Irish ancestry. And then subsequent Faroe Islands were part of several larger Scandinavian states. So a couple photos from the trip. So as the Faroese evolved, their government switched around from various larger Scandinavian states. Norway had control for the first little while, and then Denmark joined on with Norway. They were a kingdom together. And then Norway left, of course, and it remained under Danish control. The Faroe Islands were just like that until they had a cultural awakening in the mid-1900s after the Second World War and British occupation, at which point they started taking some more control back over their parliament with the Home Rule Agreement, that they would be able to self-govern under the Danish rule. So that leads to the Faroe Islands today, where their fisheries and aquaculture are the majority of their export markets, and their name deriving from Sheep Island, wool and wool products also represent some percentage of that export market. Their historical culture after their cultural awakening is at the forefront of their identity and is reflected in some of the buildings you see there, a bit like Newfoundland, where they have some very colorful buildings as well as some sod roof houses. So that culture permeates into their architecture, into their dress, etc. And their welfare state model is not unlike other Scandinavian countries. Additionally, their employment rate is the lowest in Europe and one of the lowest worldwide, somewhere like under 2%. Yeah, so many ancient traditions remain intact. They're connected with nature, which I already mentioned. And also, one issue I'll highlight with their existence on the world stage now that everything is connected. So their traditional whaling operations have put them under some scrutiny in the international stage, as their methods of killing the whales are considered inhumane by outsiders. These are the traditional methods they've used, so I don't have an opinion on that, but an anecdote, I suppose. And I'll bring Ellen up from the business faculty to continue from here. Thank you all.
So as he said, my name is Ellen. I'm from Faculty of Business, and whenever I first was brought onto this project and I was looking over what all of these projects were, I was very confused as to how a business student ended up in something that seemed so heavily in engineering and environmental sciences. So I was quite confused and a little bit worried about traveling over there, but Anna certainly helped in the whole part of it, and it was great to be over there and actually experience all of the culture. So this is kind of how our days went. So you lived in a house with 5 other people, and they weren't all from your same country. So I lived in a house with a couple of guys from Scotland. I had another girl who was actually from UPEI. The Faroese students, they visited quite often. We were all in walking distance. So you got to live in that house. You cooked with them, you talked with them, you played cards with them. You kind of learned all about their culture, what they were like, and you actually became quite close with them over the week that you were there. So they fed us every day at the school. So you go and you grab your lunch, you come up and you'd have a lecture. So there would be someone that came in from the local industry, just to give you a little bit more on the culture that you were dealing with. So whenever you tried to implement your solutions, you weren't throwing band-aids on problems that didn't fit with the culture. So you really want to be able to weave in your solutions so that people would be better able to adopt them. So as you can see, you were with the team. And your team basically worked on the same project the whole time you were there. So you basically lived with them the entire day, and this girl right here in the plaid in the middle, she was one of my roommates. She's also from the University of Prince Edward Island, but wasn't able to be here tonight. This girl here with her bachelor, she was our local Faroe Islands student. She had a lot of insights that we were able to use, so we really got a concept of how they felt about the projects, what their aspects, what they wanted to achieve, everything like that. So it was really helpful to get that local insight. Because without that, we would have went in a completely different direction with that project, and we never would have accomplished something that would have been helpful to those people. So it was really crucial to have that Faroe Islands student as an insightful person.
So they all spoke English quite well?
Yeah. So English is spoken by all the people that were there, which was really helpful. That way you didn't need translators, or you didn't have that barrier for bonding with people. I believe this was from Jane's house, actually. So this is just a picture of one of the suppers that you cook in the evenings. So with all these different cultures comes a lot of different foods. So everybody wants to cook their favorites from home that they can share with you, and you get to try all these different things that if you went to a restaurant, you look at that on the menu and go, I don't know what that is. But if somebody cooks it for you and offers it, you're most likely going to try it. So that was a really great way to kind of get over that barrier. That was actually one of the houses that was in kind of the downtown area. So you have to imagine that Torshavn is very, very tiny. Smaller than Charlottetown. So whenever we say downtown, it's kind of similar to this, where everything's kind of walking distance, which is quite nice.
And those all dishes?
No.
No. Honestly, I can say I'm not a fish person. I know, worst islander ever. But I did try fish when I was there, and it was actually much better than I anticipated. So chalk that one up as something off my bucket list that I tried. So this is actually one of the cute little markets that we frequently go buy groceries from. So you were given a budget for the week, and everybody in the house went grocery shopping together. You kind of decided what foods you were going to make, and which was a big process because with all of those different pallets, nobody actually knows what they want to eat. So trying to go shopping is kind of like herding chickens at one point. So it doesn't always work well, but you really did have that experience of trying to learn what people like, how people function. So that was actually quite a fun experience. And then usually throughout the days, because it'd be a little bit mean to make us travel all that way and not let us go outside to play. So they frequently took us on little excursions like this. So one day we actually hiked over the top of a mountain, and at first you're like, why would they do that to you? That seems quite mean. But it was actually one of the most gorgeous views you will ever see. You come up over the top of this mountain. We had this cute little meeting where, you know, we had a little bit of a lecture and a talk about the meaning of that place and all the history that was involved. And you'll go over this valley, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I have quite a few pictures from there. I don't know if any of them actually made it onto this. But you can actually see the flag, which is on Jordan's back, and my mother was very concerned about me going traveling. She has this thing where she just don't know you're going to die when you're traveling. So I actually had this flag made that says, "Hi Mom, still living." So I could take pictures and send them home. And there's so many pictures, yeah. I'm pretty sure 95% of the pictures I have of me have that flag in it, which is probably in hindsight not the best. But it's okay because I sent them home to Mom, and she was quite happy that she got daily updates. So this was one of the villages that whenever you come over the mountain, you climb down the other side of it, and this is the village that you walk into. And it's absolutely stunning. It's right on the seaside. It's a historic village, and I believe it's, 7 generations that have been there. And basically, whenever you walk into this village, they're all in costume. They make this beautiful traditional meal that we just about died for. I'm pretty sure the dessert I could have eaten 3 bowls of and not blinked an eye about it. But it's absolutely gorgeous, and they're so excited that you're there, which was one of the best parts about going to the Faroe Islands. They were so happy to have people there that were actually there to learn, that were interested in what they were doing and what their culture was. And it was so evident in the way that they treated you. You could go talk to anyone, you could be walking down the street, and they'd be so interested in what you were doing, which was just amazing. So all around Faroe Islands is cliffs like this, which is absolutely stunning. Like, our cliffs are gorgeous, but they have nothing on those because those are just amazing to sail by, which we actually did do. They took us on a little boating excursion, and there was little puffins, and they put us in these little Bob the Builder helmets, so there's a sea of kind of yellow helmets floating around, but it was amazing to get to go see. And these are some of the Faroese students. So this was my human right here that was involved in the project. So as I said, they were so helpful for giving us insight into the culture. We never would have been able to break that barrier without them. So it was so nice to have those local insights that weren't filtered at all. They would tell you like it was, and it was so much more useful than trying to tiptoe around little traditional things that they valued and just getting through that barrier. And next we're going to talk a little bit about the design challenges. We won't try to bore you with a whole bunch of technical details because realistically we know you want to hear about all of our experiences. But we're going to give you a really quick overview of what each of our projects were. So the first one, actually there's two of them that worked with a local hatchery called Backfrost. Then there was mine, who was with the city of Tórshavn, and we worked with the local municipality. And then there was the ferry service for the Faroe Islands, as well as KJ Hydraulics.
I'll come back up for this one. So Backfrost is a salmon producer. They produce farmed Atlantic salmon in all the, not fjords. Any of the other students will let you know they are not fjords because they were not made by glaciers. But they look like fjords. All the fjords are surrounding the Faroese Islands. Backfrost being the largest Faroese employer, as well as the largest single electricity consumer at approximately 20% of the total energy supply. So our project was centered around that. With the complete decarbonization of the Faroese electricity supply, Backfrost represents a massive chunk of that. And Backfrost, for their end, would also maybe perhaps like to be an energy producer and maybe move into markets like that. So that was their motivation behind it. This was our team. Myself, Arnie, Stina, and Christina, all from different universities, Icelandic, Norwegian, and Spanish, studying in Orkney. So we were all put together on this challenge of taking the Backfrost energy requirements and suiting those to renewable energy supplies, be it solar photovoltaics, wind power, maybe even hydropower. And within the Faroese context, the one that stood out was wind. Much like PEI, the wind resource on the Faroe Islands is good. The Faroe Islands, of course, is quite a bit better. Being so isolated in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there's not a lot of disruptions in terms of airflow around the Faroe Islands. So they can achieve the kind of capacity factors you'd expect offshore, which tends to have quite a bit higher production, onshore, which means it's quite a bit cheaper. So wind energy ends up being quite a good option on the Faroe Islands. Much like PEI, but more so. So our job was to model integration of renewable energy sources within the Backfrost electricity loads, and then propose some ideas on how they might be able to take that information and apply it with SEV, the electric company within the Faroe Islands, and move into that marketplace or do it all themselves. And if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to tell you about it later on. Stephanie will talk about the other Backfrost project.
So Backfrost is a well-known salmon producer in the world, and they're interested in expanding their hatchery because they're already at the maximum of the leases that they can have on the water, and so they're sort of limited in what they can grow. So the idea is if we can move some of that production and do more of it onshore in a hatchery, then we can actually grow more fish. So to expand the hatchery, they're looking to expand it by 3 times its current size, which would make it the largest hatchery in the world. And hatcheries need oxygen. The fish need oxygen 24/7. And so they wanted us to find out what are the best ways to deliver this oxygen to meet the needs in a way that's hopefully environmentally friendly and not too expensive. And so I won't go into detail about the technology, but I'll be happy to answer questions later if you're interested. This is their current technology. They take the oxygen from air, so using energy to pressurize the air, they separate oxygen from nitrogen. The oxygen goes to feed the salmon, the nitrogen is a waste gas, and it is not captured or used. With electrolysis, which involves hydrogen, the nice thing is, when you're producing the oxygen for the hatchery, the hydrogen is very useful because it's a fuel that you can use. So now you don't have any waste products. The This is also energy intensive, but now there's ways you can do with that hydrogen. And so we've discussed things that we can do would be using as fuel, so that instead of the marine fleet using diesel, you can use hydrogen. And also, the other option is to use a fuel cell to feed the hydrogen in to produce electricity. So we looked at those two scenarios and determined, well, which one is better from a financial point of view and from an environmental point of view. And because this is a very unique use for an electrolysis, people generally produce hydrogen, with oxygen being something as a superfluous side product. So to build this huge electrolyzer to produce oxygen is very unique. Because it is so big, the energy costs are massive. To use their existing technology, but just to buy more of them, it's about 22 Danish krone million per year in energy costs if you're supplying it with the grid. To do it our way with electrolysis, it's nearly 10 times more energy. But we are producing hydrogen, so there might be savings by using some of that hydrogen as fuel. So you do save some money by using it in its fleet, and much less so if you use it for electricity. So even though you could save some money, you can see the difference. It still really cannot compare with existing technology that we have. But the really interesting tie-in with Jordan's project is, if you produced all this hydrogen and oxygen with wind power, all of a sudden that top line is zero. You don't have an annually energy cost, but what you do have is annual savings from the marine use. And it also ties in with one of the other projects that we talked about tonight. Is it possible to use hydrogen in marine fleets? And before I turn it over, what we looked at is other islands have actually gone forward with hydrogen. Japan is building a hydrogen society. After the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, they looked at how it created an energy crisis because they had to shut down nuclear reactors after the meltdown. And they thought, well, we can't rely solely on nuclear going forward. Energy should really involve hydrogen. So they've actually started producing with their academia, with their industry and government. They now have equipment like forklifts, they have residential fuel cell units, they have trains, buses, cars fueled by hydrogen. And they have so much demand for it, they can't supply its own. So then they go to another island, Australia, who is actually exporting hydrogen for Japan's use. And for the first time ever, they've exported hydrogen that's produced using solar energy. So in that way, it's produced completely without emissions, and then when it's burned, it's also emission-free. So looking into the future is kind of that Prince Edward Island and the Faroe Islands can learn from other islands and see how they're further ahead of the curve compared to us in terms of hydrogen use.
Back up again. So this was actually the view out my bedroom window every single day whenever I woke up. So what you see is there's two cranes there. So they're actually putting in an extension of a wharf, I believe, so that cruise ships can come in. So that's actually what that project was. I just thought it was a great view of where we actually were. This is also part of the city that we were in. So for my project overview, this all came from the goal that the Faroe Islands had of being 100% carbon neutral by 2030 for all infrastructure that was owned by the municipality. So this is what my group was solely focused on. Yes, they want to be green as a country, but for my specific project, it was just for the municipality. So what can we do? So a little bit of background on the energy policy, which is where they got that goal from, was there was two specific goals that this group wanted to tackle. The first was all heating and electricity would be based on green resources by this 2030 date. And the second goal was they wanted to increase pedestrians and cyclists by 2020. So they wanted to double that by 2020 compared to what they had in 2016. So this is just part of the green initiatives that they wanted to implement. So with all of this, they appointed these 3 people, along with a few other sidekicks that they had, just to try and tackle this massive issue. So we had Olva, Johnny, and Toje as the sustainability team that we worked with. So as you can imagine, that's a massive goal for this team to take on. So basically what they were trying to do is carry an entire city up a mountain, and this city was probably capable of walking, but they're trying to carry them. So they had this massive issue that they were trying to tackle, and a lot of the province or the city probably didn't understand what they were trying to do. So this is where our project team came in. So there's myself and Ellie from UPEI. as well as Ellie Riley from Orkney Islands in Scotland. Sigurdur, she was from Iceland, as well as Anna, who was from Faroese. So our group partnered with the sustainability team, and we tried to look at this overall problem. So whenever we originally signed up for this project, this was the original goal that we had. So work with the municipality to develop strategies to reduce emissions and investigate alternative fuel options. So whenever I left BEI, I was all set. I was so excited that we were going to review their building codes, we were going to look at all their green building standards, we were going to help them reduce all these emissions. And then whenever we got there, we realized that that project, we weren't going to get anywhere with that. Because this whole community didn't understand what they were trying to do. So we had these three people fighting tooth and nail to carry this city up a mountain, and the city was fighting the whole way. So what we reevaluated was, we really had to look at what could we best accomplish in those 10 to 12 days that we were there. Yeah, we could sit there, we could go over data, we could suggest all of these green alternatives, but that wasn't going to help the sustainability team any. Because they could scream all they wanted, but nobody was going to listen to them. So we revised this to develop a strategy that was based on public education. So if the public didn't understand what they were trying to do, then there wasn't really any use in them doing it because they weren't going to get funding, they weren't going to get support. So what we did was we created a brand for them. So everything they did, they could brand it. People would recognize that they were trying to do good for their community. We also created websites that would increase public outreach and offer educational resources. So I know there's a lot of communities that struggle with this, where you're trying to do this awesome green project, but you don't get any support because nobody understands what the project is, or they don't know about the project. So that was all that our project was trying to do. So we really shifted focus from creating all these green energy resources and alternatives that they could implement to how can they actually get the support to actually make this happen. So that was a very big task for us, because these three genius people that were already on the sustainability team, they all came from engineering, mechanical, environmental backgrounds, but they really didn't have that business aspect, which really surprised me whenever I got there, because I was the one that thought I was going to be very out of place and kind of sit in the corner a little bit as the engineers kind of took over. But this is where we really got to incorporate all of those different disciplines and really come out with a business strategy that they could use to implement and actually get further in their project. So this was actually one of the pictures that I sent to my mother. So this is one of the gorgeous little islands off Torshon. We actually went there for dinner one of the nights, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And then this is Ellie, one of my other partners on the project. And she found the fish and she quite liked it, so she had to get a picture with it. Great. Next up is KJ Hydraulics.
So this one was my project that I was working on. So my name is Daniel Wortman, and I'm an undergrad student here in the new Faculty of Sustainable Design Engineering, just over there. And I had the good fortune to be selected to go on to this project. With me, there was also Frederico da Silva, who was a Portuguese student studying at the Orkney Islands, who was doing his master's in hydrogen technology. And for those of you who think hydrogen is kind of this forward-thinking, sustainable resource, it's one of the crazy things about the Orkney Islands is the majority of their vehicles there are actually powered with hydrogen. So all their cars, a lot of their transport, they're already doing it there. So they were trying to just move a bit farther north and see if they could get the Faroes on board as well. And then we also had Katrin as our local Faroese student, who we actually had the good fortune had worked with the energy company on the Faroe Islands before, just in her personal life. And so she had a lot of good experience and good insight as to what the Faroe power situation looked like and how we could best benefit it. And then there was also Sindri, who was an Icelandic student who came over for the project, who, while he was also studying engineering over in Iceland, before that he worked for over a decade on fishing vessels in the deep sea. So he had a wealth of experience for this project that was just unparalleled. So specifically on the project, we were working with KJ Hydraulic, which is a local company that designs and produces these catamaran vessels that are heavy duty, designed for farming and fishing salmon. And what they were hoping to do was work bilaterally with one of their biggest clients, Bakkafrost, towards newer and greener technologies. So as Stephanie and Jordan already talked to you about, Bakkafrost is the biggest salmon producer on the Faroe Islands, and one of the biggest in the world, in fact. They were interested in moving towards a greener fleet for their marine vessels, and so when a client has a demand, they wanted to try and meet it as best they could. So we were going to try and support carbon emission reduction through their catamaran redesign so that it could be more sustainably powered. So this is also one of the reasons why this project works so well on the Faroe Islands and would be a bit more difficult to implement here on PEI, because the Faroe Islands marine fleet was mainly focused around this one company, Bakkafrost. They had this big powerhouse with a lot of money to invest and a lot of interest in working with greener technologies that had ownership of all these marine vessels, so they were really ready to put the coin in and put the time in and put the work in to going green, whereas on PEI, for our fishing vessels, we have a lot more individuals running their boats, family-run ships and things like that. So, for example, Paul Patterson is a local guy who works, he runs Red Rock Power Systems, which is trying to get local fishermen to go green and try using hydrogen as a fuel source. But you can imagine going to local fishermen and trying to convince them to try something new and go with hydrogen. It's scratching at a brick wall, and it's really difficult to do because it's a really high initial cost and it's a long-term benefit on that kind of a project. So hopefully, if more companies like Bakkafrost can invest on the research and design, once these solutions are out there, it should be a lot easier for other islands to adopt and hopefully to make its way across the sea. So why are we talking about the fishing industry? As you might remember, Jordan just mentioned that the whole goal is 100% carbon reduction on land, which has nothing to do with the fishing industry, but the fishing industry is really the big elephant in the room with these projects. So as we mentioned before, the Faroe Islands is the second biggest consumer of oil in the world per capita, based on a 2016 study, and about a third of all their oil usage is in the fishing industry. So a big reason for why they went with 100% on land is because this is a Herculean task that they didn't think was feasible to tackle at the moment, but they know that going forward, this is the direction they want to move in. And it also helps them reach that 100% goal, because any savings that are done in the fishing industry just kind of add on to that 100% to help them meet that. So it's really, really important that they do this. And they were also part of the Paris Accords to reduce overall global carbon emissions. And this wasn't just as some small country taking part, because they really do have these big oil consumptions. They really did need to look at this. So for our specific project, we were looking at how to redesign their catamarans so that they could have the hybrid technologies. And this is the current system they use. So it's a diesel propulsion, 2 diesel propulsion engines going for 300 kilowatt hours with big fuel tanks and a big genset. And we had a 2-phase system that we wanted to help them implement. The whole idea being that we wanted to ease the transition to more sustainable sources, because as I'm sure a lot of you guys know from PEI, the fishing industry can be pretty resistant to change. So we wanted to make it as smooth of a transition as possible. So phase 1 being a hybrid electric diesel system to kind of introduce the electric technology, and phase 2 being a hybrid hydrogen one. So just a high-level overview of what we were looking at doing was first putting in the electric components so that we could offset the diesel usage with battery usage, and kind of refine that technology to make sure that we could get it working and really optimize it for the ships before we move on to phase 2, where we would try and implement the hybrid hydrogen system. So the trade-off being overall there would have to be a bit less power consumption, but hopefully with phase 1 they would be able to rely on the redundancy of the diesel system, and then in phase 2 they'd be able to rely on the redundancy of the electric system that they would have been able to work on and have a lot better design by that point, and take some years to really hone in and make sure it all worked out nicely, and that they would be able to trust this system rather than introducing it right off the bat. So next up, I'm going to be passing it off to Kat.
So I'm Catherine, I'm in my 4th year of the Environmental Studies program, and I worked alongside Jane, as well as Turi from the Faroe Islands, and then Lars and Arinte from the Heriot-Watt University. So we worked with Strand-Farskip Lansons, or SSL, which is a nationally owned transport company, and they provide transportation across the Faroe Islands. So we worked within their maritime sector. And as mentioned earlier, they've acquired a hybrid diesel-electric ferry, so our goal was to further research this before the public can actually use it, and then just inform them what it's all about. So one of the main driving factors behind having a hybrid diesel-electric ferry is this map on your left with the red lines demonstrates the current ferry routes that SSL services. The map beside it with the yellow line shows the proposed tunnels. So people will be able to drive from island to island, and this will reduce the reliance on the ferry service. So SSL wants to appeal to a new market of tourism, so having a hybrid diesel-electric ferry could allow them to take new routes to more ecologically sensitive areas for bird watching because they could be noise and pollution free. Also, they want to fit in with different environmental regulations to be more environmentally friendly, and research for the future with also reducing their reliance on oil. So we also looked into hydrogen options for them. And finally, they also have an aging fleet, and instead of tuning their engines, they see the importance in brand new ships. And I think it's interesting to relate this project to Prince Edward Island, as we also have a ferry service, and kind of use the lens that we learned while doing this project and see how it could be implemented here.
We get to tell you all the good news. So we have secured 5 years of additional funding for this event, or we have, Nora has committed to that. The next event in May of 2020 will be held here at UPEI. So it'll be a similar round of applications with students coming from all of these different universities to work on projects in May of next year. Anticipating 5 students from each of these universities, and 5 new clients in PEI that will get to take advantage of this strategy and meet a whole new group of students coming in. Of course, we'll be here to help in any way we can. So that's a big thank you to all of these people who made it happen for us, and for you, of course, for being here. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask anybody here, we'd be happy to answer them.
Combination of learning about the Faroe Islands and learning about energy and all of the energy coming from these students. This is absolutely terrific. Questions, comments? Adam?
Hydrogen. It's great when it's in liquid phase, but when it becomes a gas, it has a tendency to explode and catch fire. What don't I know about hydrogen that makes it the miracle fuel for the Faroe Islands and also the Danes?
I guess that's a big question. Speaking to safety, existing containment technologies are quite a bit more advanced than just like a tank that you might have outside your house for heating oil. Existing tech, and I can't speak too much to this, if you want to call the Heriot-Watt guys in Scotland, they would love to tell you about it. But newer tanks have multiple levels of security, and testing has shown that the risk of them exploding is quite low even compared to traditional sources. Gaseous hydrogen being a different thing typically really only ends up being an issue when it's an unintended byproduct. So when all these things are quite well controlled, the safety risks are very low. Why it's a good fuel source? It's very, very, very energy dense. Exceptionally energy dense by weight and by volume when compressed. And as a byproduct of it being burned, you get water. It's great. It's transportable. The only issue right now is that it's energy intense to produce or to convert into electricity. It's energy intense to produce. The existing technology isn't super mature, so it costs a bit more now, but it's anticipated to come down similar to renewable energy sources like wind or solar.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
One thing I'd like to add too, one of the benefits of doing the electrolysis right on the Faroe Islands would be that there's no real byproduct because they need to do it to get the oxygen for their hatchery to help grow their salmon, and at the same time they can use the hydrogen as the fuel source. So our project lined up really well with Stephanie's project so that both of these products of the electrolysis are used in tandem, whereas normally when this is done, oftentimes it's done for one of the resources and the other one is sold. So this should really help them use everything and keep it nice and green.
One more good application of a fuel cell is they're about 50% efficient and the other 50% is heat. So in applications like the salmon hatchery, the heat is usable and valuable. We can use heat in other applications as well. In district heating, in PEI, of course, home heating could be an option. So it does have byproducts that are useful.
One more point is when I first joined the university and I was asked even before I started the first day here, they said there's this hydrogen learning network, would you go to it and find out about it? And then this program came around. I'll tell you, I didn't know anything about hydrogen going to this, which is why this is called the International Community Energy Challenge, not a hydrogen challenge. But what I will say when you talk about energy is that there's no silver bullet, right? There's a whole host of technologies. And every time we say no to one thing, we're saying yes to the status quo. And so certainly things like solar have been developed and tested for years. But we're seeing other technologies such as more research into battery technology, into hydrogen. And so having this opportunity to learn about something that we don't get a lot of exposure to, and clearly the students here have learned quite a bit about it, I've learned quite a bit about it. And I would say it's not the silver bullet, but there's definitely places in the world where it's applicable, and as more research goes in, we're going to help to start solve some of these hurdles that have been associated with hydrogen for a long time.
Any other questions? Please.
How do they produce the electricity?
You mean using hydrogen specifically?
Well, no, the electricity to run the electrolysis and so forth for the island, how's that done?
Right.
Yeah, right now, in the past, the whole grid was run by imported diesel. That's the only energy. They don't have any energy sources domestically, so they've imported diesel, but now they're starting to increase their renewable energy mix because they're moving to renewable by 2030. So they do have solar, they do have wind, and then they have this fancy system with the
dams.
dams
pumped
and water.
hydro.
Yeah, and pumped hydro, yeah. So it's not, it might be, let's say, 25% renewable or something like that. It's a smaller fraction, but it is growing, aiming to be 100 by 2030. But diesel is still the majority at the moment.
Yeah, so with their great wind resource, they definitely have a ton of wind turbines, both constructed and being constructed. And then there's two new projects for pumped hydro. Pumped hydro is when you have a low reservoir and a high reservoir, and when you have excess energy, you pump it up to the top and then use it when it cascades down. And that ends up being almost all of the electricity storage that's on grids worldwide today, because it has existed for a long period of time, it's mature, and battery storage is comparatively expensive. So beyond the diesel imports, there's hydrogen, there's wind, and there's solar.
Please.
I guess my question is more about the cultural identity issue. And when you were there, the stories I've heard is that there's a very strong sense of identity and community there. Are they any closer from your conversations to declaring independence or going towards independence from Denmark? And I guess the second part of that is, you alluded to the whaling industry. And did any of you explore that whaling industry in terms of its, how the world perceives them, both from a tourist perspective as well as from their own personal health, with the high levels of mercury in the whale meat that they eat? So lots there.
Nice.
Do you want to speak to that? If you should, yes.
Well, talking to your first point, we really saw it as fairly analogous to the relationship between Quebec and the rest of Canada in the past few years, where so far it's been working pretty well for their relationship with Norway, and as long as they stay out of each other's way, they're happy with the current system. But there is constant talk of becoming their own nation and separation, and they're back and forth, and there's definitely those who support it on the islands, and there's definitely those who see the benefits of being a part of a bigger country, and that really helps them get a seat at the table at these bigger conferences like the Paris Accords, they probably wouldn't have gotten to if they weren't part of the bigger country. But it's still up in the air. They're back and forth about it a lot, but so far it's been maintained the status quo, and they're happy with where they're at.
And they don't seem to be that concerned about the mercury level. One of the students shared with me whale blubber and whale meat, and they were telling me they have sort of like a cellar type room that every house has to hang and cure all the meat. And it's a treat when a whale comes and it gets them divided up. And if anything, they would like to be able to have more, and they never talk about worry about consuming too much, they don't get enough.
They're really proud to share it with those of us who are willing to consume it.
One more cool aspect of the location with Denmark, the money goes into the Faroe Islands, that's the net balance. Where they are is pretty strategic in terms of geography. They're an entryway into the North Atlantic. As well, they give Denmark holds over Arctic oceans, which may become more valuable, likely to become more valuable as things happen, things change. So,
What do you mean holds over?
so their position in the North Atlantic gives Denmark the ability to
Exclusive economic zone.
exactly. So then both in terms of defense and in terms of resources.
It also gives them a stake in the argument over the Arctic at the moment, because they are.
So they get to be on the council.
Between Greenland and the Faroes. Please.
The Greenlandic government is heavily subsidized by the Danish crown. Are the Faroes subsidized by Denmark?
About the same. Well, not about the same in terms of quantity, but about the same in terms of agreement. They are subsidized less so than Greenland. There's more industry, quite a bit more industry on the Faroe Islands.
But they have access to Danish schools for free. Their students and a lot of their young people leave to go to school in Denmark.
Just curious as to how UPEI became the only North American university at that particular.
That's a really good question. It came through the engineering, Faculty of Engineering. Was invited to a seat at the table for the Hydrogen Learning Network, where all this came to be. I really don't know how we were invited to it. I can say that, I think actually I take that back. So Sigurd, who you've seen in a couple of pictures, who we really should highlight more, he is the chancellor of the Faroe Islands University. And he's also been in the one of the founders of the Hydrogen Learning Network, and I think he has a previous relationship with UPEI, and he invited us in that way. Yeah. It's all who you know.
And Alan Dale's
really.
affiliation to Alan's relationship with Nora as well would have been a UPEI institution there.
Possibly, because Alan Dale, who leads up the industry partners for UPEI engineering, has been key, and he's actually the one who pitched this original idea around the project-based work that the engineering school does.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I guess I sort of still, you outlined the projects to us, but I don't really know what where each project ended up and whether it's being continued.
Yeah, it's a good question. So in designing these projects, both whether we design it for these sorts of workshops, which I've done on a number of islands over the years, or we do it at a semester, what's key is to try to size a project that will fit with the skill set of the people who are participating, the time and the time they have, and also be useful to the clients. So we spend a lot of time working individually with each client to generate the scope. And like all projects,
You did that beforehand.
Did that beforehand, yep. So I got to do an extra trip to the Faroes, lucky me, and a whole bunch of web calls.
And a lot of paperwork.
A lot of paperwork. In fact, the first time I met with the municipality, and I have to admit, I had never even heard of the Faroe Islands before this came along, I'm sorry. And I was sitting on a webinar with them, and they were talking about all the great work they did to make Tórshavn carbon neutral. So, oh, that'd be great to have all of these documents about your municipality, your buildings, and they said, okay, but they're all in Faroese. And I thought, I didn't know there was a language called Faroe Weeks before this. So I've learned a ton, you know, culturally at least about that. So back to your question is that some of the projects have been carried on more than others. So I'll highlight Backafrost, who is a really engaged partner, has a lot of stake in this. They have a person they've hired dedicated to their environmental policy, and she's running with this, and she's been in touch with me and even with some of the students to clarification to move this forward. The KJ Hydraulic is very interested in it, but until Backafrost moves, I imagine that will be something that will be on the shelf. And then
Speaking to KJ Hydraulic a bit more though, I'd actually been talking with Kitrin, our Faroe East student who was there, and they're actually moving forward with the the high-level design for the electrical option, the electrical hybrid one that they're working on. So they're looking into that. They're speccing out some batteries to see if it's at all feasible, but they're going to start small with that one, and you know they'll wait to see with Backafrost for the rest of it. They don't want to be caught off guard.
Is that for the boats?
That's for the boats, yeah. Batteries for the boats.
keep in mind, it was 10 to 12 days, so it was wonderful, and the students did an incredible job. I mean, the presentation, they did a presentation, each team to the wider community one night, and really blew all of us away, the work they've accomplished, but it is 10 to 12 days, so, you know, and all the clients realize that, and the students realize that, but we're hoping that A, it started a dialogue, and B, it gave a kickstart to some of these projects that have just been kind of waiting in the wings for a while.
Where the ferry service is concerned, their vessel is already on order and anticipating delivery for May of 2020, so follow up when that comes on. Any other questions? On behalf of, yes, please.
So I was just wondering, when it comes to UPEI next year, it was obviously a lot of work to get all this up and running this year. Who's going to be taking it forward?
So it'll be in UPEI this year, this coming June, and then it will be in Norway the following year. So those 2 years are set. And I believe that right now the NORA is working with the Hydrogen Learner Network to actually hire a coordinator, because it is a lot of work. It's very gratifying work, but they're hiring a coordinator to help facilitate this. And it's always gratifying that the funders and the organization saw the value in this for their organizations and for the participants. It's great.
And they paid all the expenses for all the participants?
NORA covered all of the funding, so they covered so in addition to all of the students from the 5 different countries, we had Wayne Peters from engineering and myself were the faculty mentors from here, and we had faculty mentors from each of the other universities as well.
Yes, please.
So coming to UPEI is continuation of the Faroe projects, or is it new PEI projects?
It'll be PEI based, so it'll be 5 PEI projects, so if you have a project that you've been thinking about.
I got more than 5.
And keep in mind that when we pitch these projects, and we're very clear with every client and with the organization that we wanted there to be a hydrogen component that they could explore, but they didn't have to come up with a hydrogen solution. The idea is, let's look at this range of solutions. Obviously, the municipality was a totally different project, so it's not that we're trying to pigeonhole hydrogen, we're just trying to raise the the Hydrogen Learner Network is trying to raise the awareness of another potential, because, you know, we can use all the help we can get, so if there's another solution out there, we might as well add it to the mix.
So the generating electricity from wind turbines, in a sense somewhat free, would then give lots of energy for making the hydrogen and compressing it is a big part of the energy demand, I guess. And would they have enough wind energy there to provide that as well as their regular electricity needs?
Yeah, I don't do any large scale wind sizing, but as I understand it, effectively it's free now, you just need a customer. The cost of wind generation is so low, the challenge only exists in the time, right? When the wind's blowing versus when the wind's not blowing. So if you have a sink for that, be it a pump hydro station, be it a hydrogen electrolyzer, then you have a customer for it, and that's supremely valuable. The question of whether they have that capacity, they certainly do. There's wind resource abound there and very high capacity factors for the wind. So it's definitely something they would have the possibility to implement as long as the electrolyzer costs come down.
And the Faroes are also uniquely well suited to implement this kind of hydrogen technology because they're fairly well to do at the moment thanks to how well their salmon farming has done. And they're very well located with the microgrid setup of being an isolated island, but also with a lot of these natural resources at the ready that they can use. So they're really interested and really well suited, and it's a pretty lucrative opportunity for hydrogen. So while that fit very well for this one, for example, when this comes to PEI, that might not be as good a fit for a lot of the solutions.
They don't have a cable to the mainland there.
Exactly.
But they do have changes in elevation,
Yeah.
which is valuable.
With that, we're going to wrap it up and hand back over to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much on behalf of the Institute of Island Studies and the Vinland Society. We really appreciate you showing us, telling us about your trip and bringing all this energy about energy. It's absolutely terrific. On that note, Tony did bring along some signs here. Donation. You can have one of these if you'd like for a donation. This one's laminated for $5. See Tony over there. We also just have to.
Your car window or.
Yes, or your one on Houston Street across the street from us. It's very good. Just two upcoming events I wanted to mention. Already did one, the Icelandic movie. It's part of the Charlottetown Film Festival coming up this weekend at the City Cinema. So The Swan is an Icelandic movie, and I hope you'll take the time to come down to check it out. We've had really good success with the Icelandic movies that have come to City Cinema over the past couple of years, and you won't be disappointed. If you get a chance to see Woman at War, if you love if you're interested at all in energy, that movie is absolutely terrific, and you can get it on video. A friend of ours has it. See me afterwards if you want to see it. And on November 19th, our next Island Lecture Series is Brenda Whiteway, who's here tonight. She is going to be talking about an art project that she did called Shifting Sands, Capturing Climactic and Cultural Change Through Art. So very similar topic to what we're talking about with climate change, global warming, effects on an island. This is what's going to be happening in this night, in this room on November 19th. So again, thank you so much for everything. I have books for you. I just forgot to bring them. I will bring you each a copy of one of our wonderful Island Studies Press books as a thank you, and another hand for our wonderful guests.